So, welcome to Shift, the podcast about getting out of your comfort zone. We share stories and lessons about overcoming your own internal BS to drive your potential further. And I'm your guest, Elena Agaragimova, and today I'm super excited to have with me Mack Moyer. Mack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mack, listen, we've been friends for maybe a few years, 5, 6 years. How long has it been? Maybe no, less, maybe 4 years.
4 or 5. Yeah.
4 or 5, right? Yeah. And I've always found you to be this like adventurous guy. And, this was before you decided to make the big jump into traveling to, is it 80 countries now?
I'm actually on 99.
And 99 now. So
Yeah.
You're now at 99. And this was some of the things that I was like, okay, I know he's adventurous. Mack is adventurous. He likes to do these things. But when you actually went and you just kind of took off. So tell the audience a bit about who you are, where you come from. And then I want to know what made you take the jump and say, I'm just going to go and travel to these 99 countries.
All right. Well, I grew up in a very small town on the eastern shore of Maryland. Pretty small town, about 30,000 people. It was about 2.5 hours outside Washington, D.C. Ever since I was a kid, I always kind of fantasized about traveling. However, I never really envisioned myself actually doing as much traveling as I have. When I graduated from university, a friend of mine, in fact, the guy I sat right next to in our graduation, he told me about an opportunity he was going to pursue, which was teaching English in China. And in my head, I kind of thought at first, like, well, that's going to pause the career in business that you wanted to do because we graduated with business degrees. But then I found myself really unhappy with the job that I was currently working in. It was like door-to-door sales for alarm systems for businesses. And I kept thinking about what he was doing, and it really he had planted a seed that had grown into something that was more of an itch now. And I decided to look into it, and I found myself actually 3 months later in landing in Korea. I didn't know a thing about the culture or the language or the food or the people or anything. And just decided, a year abroad isn't a big deal. I'll go over there and check it out, and kind of piggybacked on his idea, did the same. That turned into what I am today, to be honest. I spent 8 years teaching English across several different countries. And then I came to a pivot point in my life where I had to decide if I was going to go back to business or if I wanted to continue as a teacher. I did decide I wanted to go back to business. So I used my experience in the classroom to go and work for an educational publishing company. I was in Saudi Arabia at the time, and I had within my network, I knew some people that worked for a large British company there. So I worked in the sales department there, was able to quickly climb that corporate ladder, as they say, and become a manager. And then I also did my MBA with the University of Manchester out of the Dubai campus. But after 8 years in the Middle East, man, it's tough sometimes there, but also I'm not a person to really settle down and plant roots for too long. And that 8 years was way past my comfort zone in that regard. So I was fortunate enough to be able to save some money. And I had really made a lot of friends that were not American, a lot of European friends. And I think the European culture is quite different in America, and that a lot of countries, a lot of people from those countries, they finish high school, and before they go to college, they take a gap year. And I was always so jealous of these people that took a gap year. And I knew that I had done some traveling, but they were always 2 weeks here or at most a month there kind of thing. But I never really got to take an extended period of time. And so it had kind of, again, the seed had been planted and it grew into a much bigger dream. And I was given the opportunity I finished my MBA, I finished my contract at my work, and a long-term relationship I was in had just finished. So I kind of felt like the stars had aligned for me to say, man, it's time to go. I'm going to get out of here. I didn't know what that exactly meant. I didn't have a full plan. I just knew that I wanted to go to South America. That was one continent I hadn't explored too much of. So took a one-way flight, and I landed in Rio de Janeiro, thinking I would spend about 6 months in South America and see where I went from there. turned into be about 15 months, traveling across 5 different continents, more than 30 countries. And it was an amazing experience. Once in a lifetime dream fully fulfilled for sure.
That's amazing. And you know what I'm always curious about, and what I wanted to ask you is, have you seen a specific like theme that emerged from you? Because I can imagine that being to 99 countries now, like what have you noticed? What are some themes that you maybe realize that there are across all continents, if there are any, in terms of how we are as humans across board?
Something that I think I like to tell people now, and I know this sounds very cliche, but I really do consider myself a world citizen rather than an American. And I know that I am an American at heart. I have those American cultural values. However, there are definitely, it's a very interesting time in America right now where we're very divided. And I think that, and I don't want to get too political, but at the same time, I do feel like we founded this country on the principles of that we're all created equal. And yet I don't feel like we actually still act that way. We say one thing, we're very hypocritical in a lot of different ways. And I think that my perception has really changed because of my travels and looking at somebody and not really caring where they're from. They're a person at the end of the day, and they have the exact same needs, desires, wants that I do. And I find different cultures fascinating because, you know, they might have slightly different values, but at the end of the day, I think they deserve the same things that I deserve, and health, happiness, love, those types of things. So I think that that's definitely been the biggest eye-opening experience for me through my travels, and just kind of forgetting about man-made borders and realizing that we're all one race. And I sometimes have this weird desire that how can we all come together as one race and not worry about that? And I'm thinking like maybe if space aliens were to invade us and we actually had to come together as one race to defeat them, kind of like in the movies. That would be kind of the only way, because I think money and religion has really divided us in so many ways. And it's sad, to be honest.
Hmm. And I also feel very much the same way. I feel that every time you kind of the more you travel, the more you've come to the conclusion which you've just described. So, and I'm curious.
And I think it's hard as well sometimes, because especially when I go home to my small town, and some people have been fortunate enough to travel, but a lot of people haven't gone outside of the typical, I would say, American destinations like Cancun, Mexico, or the Bahamas and stuff. And I certainly don't want to sound holier than thou or more righteous, or that I'm so much smarter than them because I travel, because I don't actually believe that at all. I just think I have a different perception of life, and it's sometimes hard to express that opinion without sounding like I feel I'm better than them. And so I do still struggle with that sometimes.
That's a very good point. And so, and since we're talking about like in this podcast, right, where the whole theme and why I wanted to even have these conversations is to help people get out of their comfort zone, because, and as you and I were just discussing before we started, I said, this is it, like, it's the comfort zone, like, you know, dreams die in comfort zones, as they say, right? So, and I really feel like in the work that we do with Western and Bloom Youth is that it's really just about helping people get out of the comfort zone, because once you're out of it, and once you continuously test yourself, there's such an unfulfilled potential that you realize you have, and it's, you know, it makes you realize how much more there is to learn about yourself. So I'm curious, from your perspective and your experience, what have you learned about yourself throughout these travels and just making the changes that you've made?
Well, I think there's two different topics here in your question. One is getting what forced me to get out of my comfort zone, or what can I encourage other people? How can I encourage other people to get out of the comfort zone? And two, what have I learned about myself? So I think as far as getting out of the comfort zone, the advice that I try to give people now is there are a million reasons not to do something. If you have a dream, there's going to be 101 obstacles. And it's always, I'm not ready, I don't have enough money, or what about who's going to watch my dog, or who's going to, I have all this, I have a mortgage. There's a million different reasons. And honestly, I had them as well. I mean, I had settled into a pretty nice life in Saudi Arabia after 8 years. I was making more money than I needed. So I was able, to save a fair bit. I had friends from all over the world, a very comfortable lifestyle. And actually, as I said, my contract was coming to an end with my work. They were asking to renew it with a promotion. And so it would have been more money. It would have been that next step up that corporate ladder. Everything was really tempting for me to stay in Saudi Arabia just for that 2 more years. It's always that carrot in front of the horse kind of. But I doubled down and I said, you know what? If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. This is the right time. And yes, I don't have an exact plan. And I think that's another thing. A lot of people want to have an exact plan. How much money do I need? And how long do I have? And where am I going to go? And what if I'm by myself? All those unknowns scare a lot of people. And sometimes that's what makes the best experiences. So from my experience, not having a plan is sometimes the time that I had the best time, the best experience. So that's getting out of the comfort zone. As far as what I learned about myself, contradictory to what I've just said, I used to be a big planner. My friends used to make fun of me when we would plan a trip for those 2-week trips or something like that. I literally had a folder and I would make a cover page of the country we were going to. I'd have my plane tickets in the front. I'd have our hotel reservations, everything printed out. Even though you don't need to print it out, I wanted to have that stuff there as a backup. And I think that was the teacher side of me really coming out there. But I remember coming up with some goals when I did start off on this trip. And there were things like, okay, I don't have to worry about work right now because I'm not going to worry about that. I just finished a very intense MBA and I didn't have to worry about my academics. So I was like, well, I can focus on myself now. And one thing that I knew that I wanted to become better at was being more flexible, more adaptive, and not so rigid. And so I had made it a goal not to plan past 2 days. Never have a plan past 2 days. And just give me that freedom. If I meet somebody who says, hey, we're going to hike to a waterfall, do you want to come with us? In my previous time, I was like, well, I can't because I've already got a reservation in somewhere else. And so I missed out on a lot of opportunities. With that being said, in a 2-week trip, you do need to have a bit more planning if you want to get it done, whereas I had an open-ended trip. So there were some luxuries that I had that I wasn't accustomed to. But I really made that plan. And there were a few times I broke it. There were a few times where I said, look, I want to get that hostel in the next country, and I know it fills up quick, so I would book it. And I would say 100% of the time, not 99, 100% of the time I planned ahead, I regretted it because I somehow was like, I would have rather stayed here for a few extra days. I met somebody that maybe I wanted to hang out with longer, or there was a site that I didn't get a chance to see or something like that. The one exception to that is it's good to have milestones. And I did have a few of those. I had a wedding I needed to be at 4 months into my trip. I had tickets to the World Cup in Russia that I definitely wanted to go to. And to be honest, I was ready to almost give up those tickets because I wasn't ready to be done with South America and I had to leave and go to Russia. I don't regret it because I did have a great time and it really shifted my travels off of that South America into more of Eastern Europe and Asia. But I now really want to go back and finish some of the things that I didn't get a chance to because I felt rushed in getting over there. So.
Amazing.
I guess being flexible is one of the things I learned about myself and really tried to teach myself. And to be honest, now it's almost like I've gone to the other extreme. I really was really rigid in here, and now I refuse to make more. I really don't want to make any plans because I've seen the other side and how good it can be to not have a plan and just go with the flow. And so I'm planning a trip at the moment, and I'm really trying not to make any plan. It's hard because you have all this free time on the weekend to like, oh, what do I do? I have ideas, but I don't lock myself into anything. So.
Yeah, that's a good way to travel. Yeah, if you have the flexibility to do so. But and I like what you said about, just kind of 2 days at a time. And I think that sometimes in life, and especially after last year, sometimes all you can do is just like 1 day at a time, right? So like just 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time. So that's can be completely applicable to even the way we're living, right? So, and it's and I completely agree. I think beautiful things happen when you just kind of go with the flow, and you have to essentially just, I think, the ability to trust yourself, to trust the process,
Yes.
whatever process you believe in. I mean, I don't know, whatever entity, universe, God, whatever people believe in, right? So I think trusting that things will work out is
Yeah.
a big part of it. So that brings me to my next thought and question is, where do you think would you be now if it wasn't for this experience? Let's say you did, like you didn't take this sort of jump and decide to just, leave your work and travel. Where do you think you'd be?
It's a great question. And obviously, there's no right answer to this because I really don't know. It's a parallel universe that I luckily I'm happy I didn't experience because I like the one I did choose to take. But I probably would have stayed with the company I was at and take that promotion. So I would have probably focused my life more on what the MBA. I felt I was kind of in a bubble in that MBA. Although I very much appreciate the experience I had in the MBA, I do feel like I kind of got a little into the career is so important and climb that ladder and get that title and get that money. And I think I really easily could have gotten wrapped up in that lifestyle. And I see so many of my colleagues that do that. And some of them are changing jobs on a regular basis just because they get that better opportunity that gives them that one director title or that a few $1,000s a year bonus. And it's unsatisfying from my experience. And maybe it works for some. I can't definitely speak for everybody, but for me, I found that to be a very empty lifestyle. Where does it end? And I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about my lifestyle I have chosen is you can travel to 100 countries and yet you're still going to want to go to 150. Where does it end? I get it. But I do find experiences over things to be so much more valuable. And I think that that's another thing that played out in this trip for me is one thing that felt so refreshing was selling all my stuff in Saudi Arabia when I lived there. After 8 years, I collected a whole lot more stuff than I thought, getting rid of all of it and boiling everything down to one bag that I was going to put on my back for over a year. And it's scary to think about, but while you're on the road, you realize, man, I never used this. Why? And you start even losing more things. And you're like, man, I don't even need this bag full at the end of the trip because you're like, I don't care if I'm wearing the same shorts 2 days in a row. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I don't need dress shoes. I need a solid pair of flip flops, and that's it. Yeah, or hiking boots as well, because I did a lot. Right. And I really I stopped valuing possessions and tangibles, and I really started saying, I want this experience, and I will pay a lot of money for this experience and this story because I will take this to my grave. And this is a story I can tell on my deathbed. Whereas if I buy a car today, it's going to be valueless in 5 years, and I'm really not going to care about it. I'd almost be like, I need a new one. Whereas I'm never going to need a new story about hiking in Patagonia, kind of. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff to me is really. And yeah, we might talk about it later. But I finished the trip to come home and be with my dying grandmother, and I watched, although she had some great experiences, and she very much valued a lot of experiences over things, she did have a lot of things. And I watched her coming to the end of her life, worried about where her things were going to go, making sure that people that wanted them had them, and just making sure that everything was ready so that the people in her life didn't have to worry too much after she passed. And I realized I don't want the same. Like I want. She really did have a lot of things, and it became a burden to her. And I don't think experiences are a burden. Good experiences.
Listen, that resonates with me so much, and I'm sure with so many people. This whole, and I mean, I see us as a society, I guess I see more and more people moving towards that minimalism lifestyle, right? Like experiences over that possessions, and sure. I'm with you. Like I'm all up with you. Like again, just having moved around as well a bit, I've realized it's just, first of all, it's just so freeing. Like that you speak of that freedom. Like I felt it, really like like I feel it when you said it, I was like, like I just felt that sigh of relief because I know what that feels like. And again, I think another point you mentioned, which is important, is that, to each his own, right? So for some people, maybe they want to kind of climb that ladder and have that.
Sure.
And for others, maybe it's to travel. But what I think is important is giving yourself a chance to experience both, so then you can make a conscious choice.
Exactly,
right?
yes.
And again, like that was the whole inspiration behind having this conversation, is to say, why we're usually our own blockers from doing something. Like, it doesn't hurt us, just try something, get out of your comfort zone, right? Try something new, and then you can make a decision. But at least it's an educated, conscious decision versus assumptions or excuses, etc. That's the whole point, right? So I think that it's, again, to each his own, but it becomes much more credible and much more applicable to your life when you've done both, and then you say, you know what, this what works for me. But at least that lesson came from somewhere, right? So it's
if I hadn't been in the corporate world, I wouldn't know how much I appreciate the freedom of not having things and not having 20 bosses and things like that. And obviously it can't last forever. I do have a job now, and ironically, I've actually started to buy things again, but I have to be honest, I'm much more cautious about it now. And I do feel like they're burdens. I feel like I constantly have this itch again of, if I could just find a place that was pre-furnished, or, something where I can easily pull the ripcord and buy that one-way ticket and get out of here again. And I think I've set myself up in a happy balance. And I think that that's important to realize that, you can be in one extreme or the other. But really, there's a balance of having some things, and they are important, and being comfortable, but at the same time being able to satisfy that itch if you need to.
I just have a couple more questions for you, Mac. And one is, was there a moment during your travels you were like, oh man, like I need to, what am I gonna do after this? Like, did you regret the decision at any point? Or, like, was there any moment where you just kind of like, you're like, was this the best decision? And if there was, what sort of thing that kept you going? And maybe there wasn't, but I'm just curious.
Without a doubt, that thought is definitely heavy on my mind throughout the entire trip of, is this the right choice? And I would always come to the conclusion that it was, but it was always a lingering question of, am I screwing up? Am I hurting myself by not having a job for a year? Is this going to look bad on the resume? Am I going to be able to integrate back into the business world when I finish this? It is a fear, and it was a concern of mine. It was a mixture of pushing down that fear, one, that kept me going, but two, I think it's a matter of telling a story. And as I came back into the job market, and when it was time for me to get a job again, it was actually, and I think you and I have actually had a conversation about this, because I was concerned about how do I spin this story to make it sound like there was value in it. And actually, I think I had missed a lot of the value that I hadn't been tapping into. This isn't going to look bad on the resume. This is something that a lot of people want to do, and most likely the interviewer has a similar dream to me as this. But showing what did I get out of it. So that I said I had taken a chance to do some self-reflection. What did I learn from it? And how can I use these experiences to better the company, do better at a job, something like that. There's so many examples of ways that I can do that. So I found that fear was it was an unneeded fear, to be honest. I think doing something like this is certainly not going to hurt anybody as far as, if they have a career trajectory, this is only going to add value to it. I truly believe that.
And you've kind of answered my next question a little bit here, but if you were to give somebody an advice, because about traveling, about kind of doing what you've done. So whether it's, maybe it's not a year worth of travel, maybe it's a couple of months, maybe it's a month, whatever it is. But usually the biggest thing is some of the fears you've described about how do I get back to the working world after this, right? And B, it's about budget, and people say, oh, I don't, I can't afford it, etc. And you've done it in a quite sort of affordable way. Like you said, you said that one backpack. So what advice would you give to people who wanting to do that? So maybe they're afraid of making the choice to say, listen, I'm just going to do this. Maybe they are financially able to do that, or maybe they just feel like it's too expensive and they can't. What advice would you tell them?
Well, I was in a unique situation. I did have some savings. I certainly was not traveling 5-star in any way, shape, or form. But I also could have traveled cheaper. So I think I was in the middle, and I was at a point in my life where I did have a few extra luxuries than if I had been in my early 20s doing this. So let me give you an example. The girl that I dated for quite a while, she had done a 6-month trip through Africa and India on 3,000 pounds, British. So that's not a lot. And it shows it is possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're in your mid 30s, you're not real keen to be sleeping in a 20-person dorm room every single night. And so there is a balance. I mean, you have to understand what you're capable of doing. So understanding what you have and if you think you're going to be going in, social media can be dangerous because it'll show you Bali and it'll show you these beautiful hotels that have these great views on the water and all. That's not where you're going to stay. You can visit those places, but that's not where you're going to stay if you have a budget. You're certainly going to be on long overnight buses and not taking planes everywhere. And you're certainly not going to be eating at 5-star restaurants. But
which is an experience on its own, right? That's the real experience for me, at least.
You can sprinkle those things into your trip, but it's certainly not going to be on a daily basis. But to be perfectly honest, those aren't where you truly get to see the culture. Those aren't where you truly get to meet the locals, and those aren't where you're going to walk away with these amazing stories. Now, yes, a foodie, which I'm not a foodie, but a foodie might say, hey, I want to go to these restaurants. Pick 4 or 5 of them in your trip and make sure that you budgeted for those splurges. I did have a couple splurges in my trip. The World Cup in Russia was certainly not cheap, but it was one of the splurges that I planned for. I also did a 1-week liveaboard. I'm a scuba diver, and I love to scuba dive. And kind of the Mecca for scuba diving would be the Galapagos. And trust me, by far, that was the most expensive thing I did on my trip. But it was well worth it. And one of my best travel stories is coming out of that trip. And so for me, the money that I spent on that was worth it. But I have to also say, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to take a cruise to Antarctica. I had to choose. You have to make sacrifices. So it is possible in any budget. It's just a matter of understanding that and not saying, I need to have a 5-star along the way. Figure out what's really important to you, what's really valuable to you, sprinkle those in among the trip, and the rest of the time, do it as cheaply as possible. And I promise you, most of your stories are probably going to come from when you're not spending all that money, in my opinion, or my experience, rather.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you do quite a bit of posting on social media about this. So if you wanted to share, where can somebody follow you to look at some of the photos and some of your stories? Because I love those. You just posted something the other day, like you remember, I think you were going through like a reminiscence time.
I was having a little reminiscing time, and I was like, oh, I miss my travels. I want to post them. So, yeah.
I just love that I have some really favorite moments with some videos and photos, and you're super creative with the way you put this together. Like it's a story. Your Instagram for me tells a story on its own. So where else can people find you? What's your Instagram, if you can just...
Well, my Instagram is where_is_Mack.
Yeah, and it's Mack. Yeah.
Mack. Yeah, where_, and I guess you can put this in the bottom of the description of the link. In the link. But I actually didn't have Instagram before I started this trip. I appreciate that you like my social media, but I don't feel that I'm a big social media person. I do post occasionally, and I have gotten into it a little bit more than I used to. I'm glad you think I'm creative. I look at other people and I feel like I'm not as creative as them, but I do like to share my experiences. And again, it's one of those things where I do feel like I don't want to be perceived as gloating or look at what I do. I have the greatest life. And I know social media can often do that. It can give a different perception than the reality. And I do try to be careful not to air my dirty laundry on social media and show the positive parts of my life. But in general, I do feel like, my lifestyle is defined by travel. And I think most people that, if I was to die today, I guarantee anybody who spoke in my funeral would talk about my travels. And I think it's just kind of how I've become defined. And so I think my social media does reflect that. But I definitely don't want to, give any kind of misperceptions that I have the perfect life. There are struggles, and I just don't think that that's necessarily for everyone else to see. So.
Right. Well, I'm enjoying it, and I'll live
you
through
are.
some of your social media. So you're inspiring me to go travel. Anyway, thank you, Mack. Thanks for taking time to chat with us, and hopefully you've inspired some people somewhere around the world to take a leap of faith and maybe just trust themselves a little bit more and get out of their comfort zone and learn something along the way.
I hope so too, man. Honestly, if I can do it, I did obviously grow up privileged in some ways, but in a lot of other ways, it's not like I had a lot of money. I actually, when I moved to Korea, I was in debt big time. And so if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's just a matter of really having the grit and the fearless attitude to just jump and figure it out along the way. And also, hey, if you're scared to do it alone, shoot me a message. There's a good chance I'll go with you. I love to travel, even places I've already been. So, and traveling with people and getting to know them better is always a unique experience that you can take to the grave. So.
Good stuff.
Thank you so much for your time and wanting to talk to me. I love these kind of discussions. So.